Picture a factory floor in a coastal Chinese city, somewhere near the mouth of a wide grey river where the machines never stop and the lights never fully go dark. It's 4 in the morning. A woman named Lin, that's not her real name but it's close enough, is standing at a workstation packing wireless earbuds into small white boxes, one after another, until the motion lives in her hands without her mind having to ask. She makes those earbuds for the equivalent of a few dollars a day. And here's the strange part, the part almost nobody thinks about when they buy those same earbuds halfway around the world for $20, $30, $40. The price you pay is not really decided in that factory. It's not decided by how fast Lin's hands move, or how cheap the plastic is, or how many boxes she packs before the sun comes up. The single most powerful number in that entire transaction, the number that quietly determines whether those earbuds cost you $20 or $50, is a number set in an office far away by people you will never see, adjusting one figure a fraction at a time. It's the exchange rate. And for decades, China has fought, schemed and burned through enormous piles of money to keep that one number exactly where it wants it. Because if that number ever slips out of their control, the whole machine, the factories, the exports, the jobs, the growth story the world has watched for 40 years, starts to wobble. So today we're going to pull back the curtain on something that sounds impossibly dull and is actually one of the biggest economic power moves on the planet. China wants its currency, the yuan, tied tightly to the US dollar. And there is a catch, a big one, a catch that could cost ordinary people, maybe even you, more than you'd ever guess. Stay with me. Because once you see how this works, you will never look at a Made in China sticker the same way again. Let's start at the beginning, and I mean the real beginning, the part they don't teach you in school. Money, at its core, is just an agreement. A dollar is worth a dollar because everyone around you agrees it is. A yuan is worth a yuan for the same reason. But the moment you try to trade across borders, the moment Lin's earbuds have to travel from that factory to a shelf in a store thousands of miles away, you run into a problem. The store pays in dollars. The factory needs to pay Lin and its suppliers and its electricity bill in yuan. Somewhere in the middle, dollars have to become yuan. And the price of that conversion, how many yuan you get for $1, is the exchange rate. It is the hinge that the entire door of global trade swings on. And whoever controls that hinge controls an enormous amount of what happens on both sides of it. Now here's where it gets interesting. In most of the wealthy world, that hinge is allowed to move on its own. It floats. Traders around the world buy and sell currencies every second of every day, and the price bobs up and down like a cork on the ocean, reacting to news, to interest rates, to fear and greed and rumor. When a country's economy looks strong, people want its money, and the price of that money drifts up. When it looks shaky, people sell, and the price drifts down. Nobody's steering it. It's messy, and it's honest, and it's completely out of any single government's hands. That's a floating currency. China has spent a very long time refusing to let its currency do that. Instead, for years, China ran what's called a peg. Imagine you own a boat, and instead of letting it drift with the current, you drop an anchor and tie the boat to it with a fixed length of rope. The current still pushes and pulls, but the boat can only move as far as that rope allows. China tied its yuan to the US dollar. For long stretches of time, the deal was blunt and simple. $1 would buy a set number of yuan, and that number would barely move no matter what the rest of the world's traders wanted it to do. Later, China loosened the rope a little. It became what economists politely call a managed float, which is a fancy way of saying the boat is allowed to drift within a narrow little box, and the moment it tries to leave the box, someone yanks it back. But make no mistake, the anchor was always the dollar. The steering was always in Beijing's hands. So the obvious question is, why? Why would a country go to all this trouble, spend all this money, fight all these fights, just to keep one number frozen in place? Why not let the cork bob like everyone else? And the answer is the beating heart of this whole story. A dollar-pegged yuan, a yuan deliberately held low against the dollar, keeps the cost of Chinese exports down. It makes everything that pours out of factories like Lin's cheaper to the rest of the world than it otherwise would be. That is the entire trick. That is the engine. Let me show you exactly how it works, slowly, because this is the piece most people never quite grasp, and once you get it, the rest of the story falls into place like tumblers in a lock. Imagine, just for a moment, that the yuan floated freely and rose to what its economy might actually justify. Say $1 bought you only 5 yuan instead of the 7 or 8 it's been held near. Now Lin's factory still needs to earn the same amount of yuan to stay in business. It still has to pay Lin, still has to pay for plastic and electricity and shipping. But when it sells those earbuds abroad and gets paid in dollars, each of those dollars now converts into fewer yuan. To make the yuan it needs, the factory has to charge more dollars. Suddenly, those earbuds that cost $20 on a shelf might have to cost 28, 30 more. And the moment they do, a buyer on the other side of the world looks at them, then looks at a similar pair made in another country and reaches for the cheaper one. The factory loses the sale. Lin loses her shift. Multiply that across millions of factories and hundreds of millions of workers, and you understand why this is not a small technical matter to Beijing. It is survival. Now flip it around. Keep the yuan pinned low. Keep $1 buying 7 or 8 yuan instead of 5, and the math runs in China's favor. Every dollar a foreign customer spends converts into more yuan back home. The factory can charge fewer dollars on the shelf and still bring in exactly the yuan it needs to keep the lights on and the workers paid. The earbuds stay cheap. The buyer reaches for them instead of the competition. The sale happens. Lin keeps her shift. The ships keep leaving the ports stacked with steel boxes. And an entire nation's economic growth keeps humming along, fed by the simple, quiet fact that its money has been deliberately made to look weaker than it really is. Now, hold that picture in your head, because I want you to see what it actually looks like on the ground, not just in the arithmetic. Because numbers on a whiteboard are one thing, but the peg lives in warehouses and on loading docks, and in the small, anxious calculations of buyers you will never meet. Picture a purchasing manager in a suburb outside Chicago. Her name doesn't matter for this story. Call her the buyer. It's a Tuesday morning, grey light coming through the blinds, cold coffee going colder beside her keyboard. Her job is to fill the shelves of a mid-sized retail chain with electronics before the holiday rush, and she has a budget that has not grown in 3 years, while everyone above her expects the shelves to look fuller than ever. She has 2 spreadsheets open. One is a quote from a supplier in a country where the currency floats freely and has climbed against the dollar. The other is a quote from Lin's factory, or 1,000 factories just like it. Same product, near enough. Same little wireless earbuds in a white box. The first quote says $29 a unit landed. The second says 19. She doesn't think about exchange rates. She doesn't think about central banks or foreign reserves or the political fights we've been describing. She thinks about the $10 gap times 40,000 units and what that means for whether she hits her margin this quarter. She clicks the 19. And in that single click, with cold coffee at her elbow, she has just cast a vote in a currency policy she has never heard of. That click is happening millions of times a day, in every country, in every warehouse, at every kitchen table where someone is comparing prices without ever knowing why one option is cheaper. The peg is invisible, and that is exactly the point. It hides inside the price. You never see it. You just feel the pull toward the cheaper thing, the same way water feels the pull downhill, and you follow it, and every time you follow it, you are feeding the engine we've been describing. But here, and this is the part I promised you, the catch, here is where the whole beautiful machine starts to reveal its teeth. Because a peg is not free. Holding a currency at a level it doesn't naturally want to sit at is like holding a beach ball underwater. The ball wants to rise. The market, left alone, would push the yuan up, because a strong exporting economy attracts money, and money flowing in normally makes a currency more valuable. To stop that, to keep the ball submerged, someone has to press down on it constantly, with both hands, all day, every day, forever, and pressing down costs something. It costs more than most people realize, so let me show you the hands doing the pressing. When all those dollars come flooding back into China from all those foreign buyers clicking the 19 instead of the 29, those dollars would normally get sold and turned into yuan, and that buying would push the yuan up. To stop that upward push, Beijing's central bank steps in and buys the dollars itself. It takes the flood of incoming dollars off the market and swaps them for freshly created yuan. That keeps the yuan from rising. But it leaves the central bank sitting on a mountain of dollars, a mountain that has grown over the years into one of the largest hoards of foreign money any nation has ever assembled. Trillions of dollars held in vaults and, more precisely, held in the form of American government debt, quietly parked on the other side of the world. Stop and feel the strangeness of that for a second. To keep its exports cheap, China ends up lending enormous sums of money right back to the very country buying all those exports. The dollars that leave that buyer's warehouse in Chicago don't stay in China as dollars. They loop back across the ocean and end up financing the spending of the government whose citizens just bought the earbuds. It's a circle. The customer buys cheap goods, pays in dollars, and those same dollars come back to lend to the customer's own country. Round and round it goes, a river that flows out and then folds back on itself, and as long as everyone keeps rowing in the same direction, the whole thing looks like a miracle of mutual convenience. But rivers that fold back on themselves have a way of building pressure. Because here's what that mountain of dollars really is. It's savings that China cannot fully spend without unraveling its own trick. If Beijing were to suddenly dump all those dollars and buy yuan, the yuan would rocket upward. The earbuds would jump to 29, the buyer in Chicago would click the other spreadsheet, and Lin would come to work one morning to a locked gate. So China is, in a sense, trapped by its own success. It has built an economy that runs on a low currency, and it now sits on a fortune it dare not fully use, because using it would break the very machine that produced it. I want you to sit inside that trap for a moment, because it's the emotional core of this whole story, and it's easy to miss it in the noise about trade wars and tariffs. Imagine working your whole life, decade after decade, 16-hour days on a factory floor, ships leaving the port every night stacked to the sky, and at the end of it, your country has amassed a treasure so vast it staggers the imagination. And yet that treasure can't be freely enjoyed because it exists mostly as an IOU from another nation, denominated in that nation's money, and spending it would collapse the arrangement that let you build it in the first place. It's like a man who saves every coin he earns into a jar, and the jar grows so heavy he can barely lift it, but the moment he opens it and starts spending, the whole business he built to fill it falls apart. That is, in miniature, the peg's dilemma. And now you can start to understand why the fights we mentioned at the very beginning get so heated. Because there are two sides to every peg, and the buyer in Chicago has a boss, and that boss has a competitor, and somewhere in that competitor's supply chain is a factory that used to sit in a town in Ohio or Michigan or a mill town in England, a factory that once made those very earbuds, or the radios before them, or the machine parts before those. And when the buyer clicks the 19 instead of the 29, that click doesn't just feed the engine in China, it also, slowly, quietly, over years, pulls the floor out from under that other factory half a world away. Its owner watches orders shrink. He can't drop his price to 19 because his currency floats and his costs are real and nobody is pressing down on his beach ball, so he cuts a shift, then another. And one grey Tuesday, in a town that used to be loud with the sound of machines, a gate gets locked there too, and a man who has never heard the word peg in his life walks out to his truck in the cold, wondering what exactly happened to the world he thought he understood. And that man, multiplied by hundreds of thousands, is where the pressure really comes from. Not from economists, not from spreadsheets, from that man in the parking lot and everyone who loves him and everyone he votes for. So the peg isn't just a number a committee in Beijing decides on a Tuesday, it's a live wire running under the whole global economy, and both ends of it are attached to a human being. On one end, Lin, hunched over her workbench in the humid heat, threading tiny wires into tiny shells, praying the orders don't slow. On the other end, the man in Ohio, staring at a locked gate, wondering where his life went. The peg keeps one of them working and the other one idle, and then when the winds shift, it can just as easily flip them around. That's why nobody who understands this thing sleeps easy, because it can never please everyone, and the moment it pleases you is the moment it's quietly hurting someone you'll never meet. Now here's the part almost nobody tells you, the twist that turns this whole story on its head. For decades, the accusation was simple. China holds the yuan down artificially to flood the world with cheap goods. And for a long stretch, that was largely true, but somewhere along the way, the trap tightened in a direction Beijing never planned for. Because a currency that's held low doesn't just make exports cheap, it also traps wealth inside the country in a very particular, very fragile form. All those dollars pouring in have to go somewhere. They can't circulate freely as yuan without pushing the yuan up, which is the one thing the machine can't allow. So the central bank sweeps them up, hands out freshly printed yuan in exchange, and parks the dollars in American government debt and other safe foreign assets, year after year after year. And that is how a nation of savers ends up as the single largest lender to the very country it competes with. It's the strangest arrangement in modern economic history, the workshop of the world, lending its wages back to its best customer so that customer can keep buying. And here's the catch nobody wants to say out loud. The day China wants to truly cash in, to spend that mountain of foreign wealth on its own people, on hospitals and pensions and higher wages and cleaner air, it has to let the yuan rise. It has to loosen its grip on the beach ball, and the instant it does, three things happen at once, and none of them are gentle. The exports get more expensive, so the orders thin. The factories that lived on razor-thin margins start to fold, and that enormous pile of foreign assets, measured in the newly stronger yuan, is suddenly worth less at home than it was the day before. The jar shrinks the moment you reach into it. That's the true face of the trap. It was never just about keeping the currency cheap. It was about building a life so dependent on the currency being cheap that you can no longer afford for it to be anything else. So when you hear that China wants the yuan pegged to the dollar, understand what's really being said. It isn't the ambition of a country flexing its strength. More and more, it's the caution of a country that has climbed so high on a ladder it's now afraid to look down. The peg helped it climb. The peg made Lin's job, and 100 million jobs like it, exist at all. But the same peg is the thing keeping her country from spending the fortune it earned, keeping wages from rising as fast as they could, keeping a nation of hard workers waiting for a payday that the arrangement itself keeps postponing. And here's what I keep coming back to, the thing that stays with me long after the numbers fade. Every one of us is standing somewhere on that wire, whether we know it or not. The shirt you're wearing right now, the phone in your hand, the price you paid for both. Somewhere in there is a decision made by a buyer clicking one spreadsheet instead of another. A beach ball held under the water, a jar getting heavier while a gate somewhere gets locked. We think of prices as facts, as numbers stamped on tags by the neutral hand of the market. But a price is a story. It's a story about who got to work today and who didn't, about which currency was pressed down and which was left to float, about a bargain struck decades ago that we're all still living inside of, most of us without ever having read the fine print. The remarkable thing is how quiet it all is. No wars are declared over this. No shots are fired. It happens in the click of a mouse, in the sweep of a central bank's ledger, in the slow drift of a factory's order book from full to thin to empty. And the people whose lives it rearranges, Lin, the man in the parking lot, you, me, mostly never see the machinery at all. We just feel the results. Cheaper earbuds here, a shuttered mill there, a savings account that grows in a country whose people can't quite touch it. A world knit together so tightly by that single peg that pulling one thread anywhere sends a shudder down the whole cloth. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in all of this. That the biggest forces shaping our lives are rarely the loud ones. They're the quiet arrangements, the boring-sounding policies, the exchange rates and the pegs that put entire people to sleep the moment they're mentioned. And yet, those are precisely the things drawing the map of who thrives and who struggles, of which town grows loud with machines and which one goes silent. Understanding them isn't just economics. It's understanding the invisible hand on your own shoulder, gently steering the shape of your days. So the next time someone tells you the story is simple, that China cheats, or that it's all fair, or that free trade fixes everything, or that it ruins everything, I hope you'll remember the beach ball and the jar and the two people at either end of that wire. Because the truth was never simple. It was a trap dressed up as a triumph, a fortune that can't be fully spent, a strength that started to look a lot like fear. And it's still unfolding right now, in ports and factories and locked gates all over the world, one click of a spreadsheet at a time. Now I want to hear from you because this is where it gets personal. If you were sitting in that room in Beijing, holding a jar so heavy you can barely lift it, knowing that the moment you open it, the machine that filled it starts to break, would you keep the peg and stay trapped but safe? Or would you let the yuan rise, take the pain, and finally spend what your people earned? There's no clean answer, and I genuinely can't decide myself. Tell me in the comments which one you'd choose, and more importantly, why. And if you know someone standing at one end of that wire, a factory worker, a small business owner, anyone who's felt the price of something change and never known why, send this to them. I read every comment, and I'll be down there waiting.